This is the 7th day of this April 1985 7-day retreat. We will continue reading from the teaching of Wang Po, translated by John Blofeld. Let me just briefly say that it is different whether one listens with a mind of memory or listens freely to what is read or spoken. Someone mentioned that in some things there was confusion about how Wang Po said things and what had been said here before. This is when one compares, this confusion arises when one compares what one hears to what one has heard or maybe understood in the past. So is it possible for the time being to suspend all past understanding or memory and just hear these words? Tracklessly, as it were. They're not really meant to be remembered. And yet, even not trying to remember them, just listening to them every once in a while, maybe long after one has heard them, a word or a sentence may strike and lead to an understanding, to an insight. All of a sudden one sees something and understands in the light of those words. Here is part of a talk where the disciple had asked, referring to a scripture, disciple had asked, what is meant by the place of precious things? It was a reference to a place of precious things. This is all capitalized here. And Wang Po says, that which is called the place of precious things is the real mind, the original essence, the treasure of our own real nature. These jewels cannot be measured or accumulated. But where is the place of precious things? It is a place to which no directions can be given, for if it could be pointed out, it would be a place existing in space. Hence, it could not be the real place of precious things. All we can say is that it is close by. It cannot be exactly described, but when you have a tacit understanding of its substance, it is there. The disciple asks, what is the way, and how must it be followed? And Wang Po responds, what sort of thing do you suppose the way to be, that you would wish to follow it? And the question is, what instructions have the masters everywhere given for meditation practice and the study of the truth? And the answer, words used to attract the dull of wit are not to be relied on. Pesu asked if those teachings were meant for the dull-witted. I have yet to hear what truth has been taught to those of really high capacity. And Wang Po says, if they are really people of high capacity, where could they find people to follow? If they seek from within themselves, they will find nothing tangible. How much less can they find a teaching worthy of their attention elsewhere? Do not look to what is called the truth by preachers, for what truth could that be? And the questioner asks, if that is so, should we not seek for anything at all? Wang Po says, by conceding this, you would save yourself a lot of mental effort. And the questioner comes back, but in this way, everything would be eliminated. There cannot just be nothing. And Wang Po says, who called it nothing? Who was this fellow? But you wanted to seek for something. And the disciple says, since there is no need to seek, why do you also say that not everything is eliminated? And Wang Po says, not to seek is to rest tranquil, which is easier said than done. Because this seeking is one of the main programs on which we're running. Always seeking something. Including seeking tranquility. But if one has once intimately listened to this program running of seeking, what it does to the whole body-mind, the constant current of agitation, of groping, grasping, wanting, then one realizes that it's absurd to seek for tranquility. That tranquility can only be the absence of seeking, wanting. Not to seek, he says, is to rest tranquil. Who told you to eliminate anything? Look at the void in front of your eyes. Or he could say, leave that word void out. Look what is in front of your eyes. Or under your feet. How can you produce it or eliminate it? And the questioner says, if I could reach this dharma or this teaching or this truth, whatever he means by that, if I could reach this, would it be like the void? Or would it be like the void? Again, this wondering, this idea there of nothingness, of there being nothing, which as an idea is a frightening thing to the human mind, which is always engaged in something. If I could reach this truth, would it be like the void? And Wangpo says, morning and night I have explained to you that the void is both one and the manifold. Manifold meaning the 10,000 things around us. I said this as a temporary expedient, but you are building up concepts from it. One must be so careful in thinking about this work or talking about it, that one really speaks from seeing and not just from concepts which seem so real, so true, and yet to discern that what is concept and what is actuality or reality. That the concept of this little lectern is not this. Or the word knocking is not this. Pesu comes back and he says, do you mean that we should not form concepts as human beings normally do? And Wangpo says, I have not prevented you. We think like that. One asks, shouldn't I do something which one is constantly engaged in doing? What is the meaning of the question? To get another rule and guideline to live by, adding to the storehouse of rules and guidelines that enmesh us. For feeling safe that wherever we reach out we have some kind of a railing to hold on to. I've not prevented you, he says, but concepts are related to the senses. Not immediately. A sense impression needs form, no concept. There can be just pure hearing or seeing. But so quickly, the word and the concept takes over. And then whatever that is associated with in the network of thoughts, feelings, emotions, then that occupies the body-mind, and the original sense impression is dims and dulls. Can one watch that process happen? Not in order to achieve a result from it, but to watch it as an occurrence in itself. The listening, and then what is that, and the word, and I like it or don't like it. And then can one go further, having seen this process, listen again, wondering whether one can listen without the word and without a reaction, without checking on oneself whether one can or not. Let it just happen. He says, but concepts are related to the senses, and when reaction takes place, wisdom is shut out. Or direct, immediate understanding. The questioner comes back, then should we avoid any feeling in relation to the truth? He's now heard. When there's no reaction taking place, or when reaction takes place, there's no understanding. What is meant is if the reaction is automatic, mechanical, and without any awareness. At no place has Wang Po say, don't have reactions, cut them off, or something like this. He's just pointing out what takes place. But the jump is made by the listener in saying, should we avoid any feeling in relation to the truth? And Wang Po's response is, where no feeling or reaction arises, who can say that you're right? Right and wrong is always a reaction based on what we already know and have learned. And that prevents us from seeing, free from prejudice, what's going on around us and inside of us. Can one see prejudice in oneself and the barrier that it is? The wall. The questioner says, why do you speak as though I was mistaken in all the questions I've asked your reverence? He's had it. Feels frustrated. And maybe feels judged or rejected, which also prevents listening. If one is afraid of being rejected by the person one is talking to, then there's not this vulnerable openness to listen. As the narrowing down of our defensiveness. Defensiveness does narrow down our senses. And there's tension. Not the free flowing of hearing and looking. Wang Po says, you're a man who doesn't understand what is said to him. What is all this about being mistaken? They say, up to now you have refuted everything which has been said. You have done nothing to point out the truth to us. Again, something to grab, write down, put in a satchel, and take home. Whereas truth may be discovered if one understands it isn't this and it isn't that, and it is also not this and not that, and that it isn't also. it's none of that, and also not this, then in that process can the mind slow down and empty itself of assumptions, concepts. Truth may not be found by stuffing things into the mind, but by understanding. It isn't this or that either. And then the question reigns, what is it? And can that question be pure? Pure meaning not having this hidden motive of finding something anyways, regardless of what has been understood. Then the mind immediately is divided if there's this looking out for something. Divided from what is actually here. He says, you've done nothing to point out the true Dharma to us, the true teaching. And Huang Po says, in the true Dharma or teaching there is no confusion. But you produce confusing by such questions. What sort of true Dharma can you go seeking for? And questioner says, since the confusion arises from my questions, what will your reverence's answer be? Huang Po says, observe things as they are and don't pay attention to other people. What he means here very likely is to the teachings of other people who proclaim that they can teach one the truth if one only does such and such and such and such and such. He goes on, there are some people who are just like mad dogs barking at everything that moves, even barking when the wind stirs among the grass and leaves. In the middle of another talk he says, truth is not located anywhere. The first step is to refrain from knowledge-based concepts. This implies that if you were to follow any method to the utmost limit, on reaching that limit you would still be unable to locate mind. Truth was originally without name or title. It was only because people ignorantly sought for it empirically that someone appeared and taught them to eradicate this method of approach. Fearing that nobody would understand, they selected the name Way. You must not allow this name to lead you into forming a mental concept of a road. A road which leads from here to there. There is image, projected image into the future which is thought. Does one see that? At another time, the questioner says, illusion can hide from us our own mind, but up to now you have not taught us how to get rid of illusion. This thought come so frequently into the mind. There are so many thoughts. How can I get rid of them? Which is thought piled upon piles of thought. But seeing that there has been lostness in thought, waking up to that fact, at that instant, is that a thought? Or it's just seeing, yeah. One sees at a glance all of these thoughts that there were. It needn't be a thought, but the thought so quickly comes, I should get rid of that and put an end to it. Which is the beginning of a new thought train. It's arduous to watch that, but it's not impossible. Arduous because in a way we like to be caught up in thoughts. It is like rocking in a hammock. The question was, illusion can hide from us our own mind, but up to now you have not taught us how to get rid of illusion. There's also this expectation of the teacher to teach one something, rather than to understand what he's been saying all along, that can one see for oneself. And that cannot be taught, but it can happen. To anyone who is really seriously concerned with the way we live, with so little attention. And therefore so much friction in relationship. Wang Po says the arising and the elimination of illusion are both illusory. Here, the idea of illusion arising, the idea of eliminating illusion are both illusory, both thought processes. He says illusion is not something rooted in reality. It exists because of your dualistic thinking. If you will only cease to indulge in opposed concepts such as ordinary and enlightened, illusion will cease of itself. And then if you still want to destroy it, wherever it may be, you will find that there is not a hair's breadth left of anything on which to lay hold. This is the meaning of I will let go with both hands, for then I shall certainly discover the truth in my mind. I shall let go with both hands. Letting go with both hands. Seeing that there is nothing to lay hold on. That all railings are thought, fantasy, hope, projection. All of it coming from memory, past teachings, our childhood faith. I remember once, it just comes to mind, my father had been to me the image of self-assurance. No, it wasn't an image, he was self-assured. It was always safety, being with him, asking him questions he loved, that he'd sit at his desk almost day and night, but if one walked up to him and asked him a question, he'd put aside his pencil and he loved to explain. And when we'd take walks on Sundays, he'd tell us something scientific. I don't think he just did it to enrich us or stimulate the mind. He loved that stuff. And it was interesting. It was well respected. Never heard him quarrel with my mother. He'd always give in. He's just a perfect gentleman. That's how I conceived of him. And if I got to talk with friends who didn't know me, I didn't tell about myself, but I told about my father. And then came the time of the air raids, sirens howling and everybody piling down into the basement. For a while, the city that we lived in was spared. And we got to be quite friendly down with all the other people in the apartment house in the basement. It sort of almost had a good time. One man who lived there was sales representative for a champagne company. And a few times he offered some from his cellar there. In a German cellar, there are wine cellars too. Everybody has their little stash. And then bombs were falling, the city was attacked, and sometimes they fell very close. And that's the most uncanny thing you can imagine. If a bomb falls close and everything shakes and dust sweeps through the window. And I saw my father huddled up, pale and shaking. And I realized there was no refuge in him for me, or in anything for that matter. There was just plain, unadulterated fear. So here it says, I will let go with both hands. This is not an intentional action when one sees that there is nothing to lay hold of, for one's dreamed about security, as we always dream about something that will make us secure. And after that, we run and grope, forgetting entirely where we are, and being with that, without fear to face it. Because one needn't fear to face anything. Fear is running, fear is never facing. Facing is the end of fear. One lets happen what may, but there's no division which breeds fear. Here at one point, Pei Su says, also referring to scriptures or Zen teachings, what is meant by relative truth? In Zen teaching, so much is talked about relative truth and absolute truth. I think we mentioned it the other day, saying that on the absolute level there is no killing because there's no killer and no one to be killed. This difference which actually always caused me difficulty to understand the way it was worded. And here this Pei Su says, what is meant by relative truth? And Wang Po says, what would you do with such a parasitical plant as that? Makes one feel good. One has to be careful not to take an author now for one's authority. He says it's a parasitical plant, so to look, to grapple with this, what could be meant with, if one doesn't understand something. Not to take it over, but not necessarily to reject it, but to grapple with it and try to see, can I really see what this refers to? If there's some trust that the person isn't just quoting and mouthing things. Or to even leave it sit there, one can't resolve it, and somehow it has a certain ring to it. Can't understand it, and one can't let go of it, so one just leaves it sit there. And maybe at another point in time it will be clear. Either that it is so, or it will be clear that it is a parasitical plant. He says reality is perfect purity. Why base a discussion on false terms? To be absolutely without concepts. He doesn't say thoughts, he means concepts such as absolute truth and relative truth, etc. To be absolutely without concepts is called the wisdom of dispassion. Every day, whether walking, standing, sitting, or lying down, and in all your speech, remain detached from everything within the sphere of phenomena. Now this remaining detached can give rise to misunderstanding, because one already has associated ideas with detachment, sort of being an ascetic who refrains or renounces everything most of the time out of idea that this will lead to something, enlightenment, energy, conservation, or whatever. But here, remain detached from everything. Could this mean watch whether one doesn't bring this me into everything that one sees or meets, and to watch it, to see how ridiculous it is, or how needless, how unnecessary. One sees something and immediately, what could I get out of it? Or what can this mean for my enhancement? Or how can I get away from it? I don't like to be near that. Always in some way attached to it through aversion or attraction, grasping it, clutching it. If one watches carefully, it is amazing to see how, unless there is this attention which is not personal, which just sees and hears and responds from that, if that's not there, then we see everything in terms of ourselves. It's as simple as that. in one way or another. And here he says, walking, standing, sitting, lying down in one's speech, can one remain detached from everything, meaning attention. But if one now makes a new guideline out of this, I must be attentive all the time, whether lying, standing, sitting down, so then there's already this railing again one is building. It has nothing to do with attention. Attention comes on its own, out of a mind that questions with a deep concern about how we live together. And alone. He says, whether you speak or merely blink an eye, let it be done with complete dispassion. Or we'll turn it around and say, can it happen attentively? Can there be attention or awareness? Not I must be, it has to be. But is it possible? And then look. He says, most students of Zen cling to all sorts of sounds and forms. Why not let each thought go as though it were nothing? Why not let each thought go as though it were nothing? Or as though it were a piece of rotten wood or a stone, or the cold ashes of a dead fire. Which thoughts are, in a way. They are ashes of a dead fire that once burned, but now it's memory. And maybe at this point should be said that not all thoughts are rotten wood or dead ashes. All day long one has to think clearly about this or that. This building could have never been built without a lot of thought going into. Thought and skill, accumulated learning, and the more the building progressed, the more, so people mentioned, they learned. So their accumulation of experience is very valuable. And yet, there also has to be this openness to a new thing, to a new wrinkle, which takes a fresh mind, not just one loaded with the other. It's always done like this, so we have to keep doing it like this. We've read this one often before, but let's read it again. If an ordinary person about to die could only see the 5 elements of consciousness as void, one can say the whole of consciousness as void. Meaning constantly changing, constantly flowing, and not one's own personal belonging, but universal for all human beings. If an ordinary person about to die could only see the whole of consciousness as void, the body as not constituting an I, a me, The real mind as formless and neither coming nor going. One's nature as something neither commencing at one's birth nor ending at one's death, but whole and motionless in its very depth. This does mean simply not to be concerned with the concept of death or birth. Past life or future life, but motionless in its depth, silence and motionlessness in its very depth. The mind and environmental objects as one, meaning no separation between the hearer and what is heard, no separation between the seer and what is seen. Just being there as nobody. Wang Po says if he could really accomplish this, or if this could really happen, it's not an accomplishment. This could really happen, there would be enlightenment in a flash. One would no longer be entangled by the triple world, meaning the past, the present, or the future, which is the flow of thought. One would be without even the faintest tendency toward rebirth. Tendency toward rebirth still being preoccupation with thought about a better, different future, which is away from this. He says he would just be himself. He would just be himself, or one would just be oneself. Oblivious of conceptual thought, one would have attained the state of unconditioned being. This then is the fundamental principle. This thing of being just oneself, just being oneself, which is such a yearning for so many people, to be oneself. I want to be myself. I want to learn to be myself. What does it really mean? One really has to look carefully when this yearning arises to be oneself. What does one picture this to be? Or are there no pictures? Very often, what it means is being tired of a self-consciousness, which is the living up to images of oneself in the presence of others, feeling that one is expected to act in a certain way, or putting on masks, hoping that then one will be liked by others, and then tiring of this wearing of masks, self-consciousness. What does it mean to be just oneself? The word self is in there, but in this feeling of spontaneity that is being referred to, freeness, unobstructedness, there is no self-image at all. Neither one of being a free person or of being whatever. No image. And there's no need to play up to people or worry of being rejected by people. Because what feels rejected is always the image, the self-image. Doesn't mean to be oneself is to disregard or be insensitive to one's surroundings, to feelings of other people. What is oneself when there is no feeling of self? In a state, if there's a state like that, is there even the desire to be oneself? Or is that still image? One has to look very carefully. This is a deep concern. Just read the last selection in here, or next to the last, where Pesu says, but how can we prevent ourselves from falling into the error of making distinctions between this and that? And Wang Po says, by realizing that though you eat the whole day through, no single grain has passed your lips, and that a day's journey has not taken you a single step forward. Also by uniformly abstaining from such notions as self and other. Do not permit the events of your daily lives to bind you, but neither withdraw yourselves from them. Avoid the error of thinking in terms of past, present, and future. The past has not gone. Yeah, the past has gone. Or else it's memory. The present is a fleeting moment, and the future has not come. When you sit in the proper position. What's the proper position to sit in? Or is it not so much a matter of proper position? but a mind that is attentive. And still in that attentiveness, no matter how deep the turmoil that may be raging within or without, he says here, stay perfectly tranquil and do not permit the least movement of your minds to disturb you. Do not permit the least movement of the mind to disturb you. Or if there is disturbance, can it be seen, looked at, felt, without judging it right or wrong, good or bad? This alone is what is called liberation. Be diligent, be diligent. We will end here for today.